The stars are silent as you embark on this thrilling journey into the heart of the galaxy's most intense conflict. A war unlike any you've seen before. But before you dive in, make sure you're part of the fight. Hit that like button. Please, it's request for support because channel growth is going down. Soldier, if you're ready to join the battle alongside the Scorpions, leave a comment down below to let us know what you think of humanity's rise and strength. Your feedback fuels us. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic HFY adventures. The Empire's not going to defeat itself, and neither will our story. Your support keeps the galaxy turning. The Valiant was built for moments like this. The hum of the engines vibrated through the walls as Captain Reed sat at the helm, her eyes glued to the tactical display. For a ship of its class, the Valiant was an oddity. A warship designed to be agile, a destroyer capable of rapid strikes, hit-and-run engagements, and surgical strikes where other, bulkier fleets could not follow. But as the call came in, sudden, urgent, and chilling, the Valiant's battle readiness would be tested like never before. "Captain, you need to see this," Reed said over the comm, her voice unusually tight. Captain Marcus Kane's boots clanked loudly as he strode onto the bridge, his sharp, angular features set in a permanent mask of grim determination. At 6 feet 3 inches, his presence was commanding, even in the battle-scarred confines of the ship's narrow command center. He approached Reed's station and gazed at the screen. On it, a live feed of the Imperial fleet flared in red, a blinding array of ships moving at full speed into human-controlled space. "What the hell is this?" Kane muttered, his hand running through his cropped hair. His jaw tightened in disbelief. The Imperial fleet was massive. Hundreds of warships, their black hulls glistening in the void of space, bearing down on a civilian planet, Earth's closest ally in the galaxy. And yet, none of them had any clearance. No communication, no warning. Just invasion. "We've had no official notice," Reed said, her voice flat. She was struggling to hold it together. "They're ignoring all diplomatic channels. No response to any messages." "What about the Treaty of the 11 Systems?" Kane barked, his fists clenched at his sides. The treaty had been the fragile piece that had allowed humanity to thrive after years of war with the Empire. Now, it was being torn apart. "They've broken it," Reed said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Kane's face darkened. The treaty was more than just an agreement. It was a promise, one that had held the galaxy together, if only by a thin thread. The Empire had pledged to respect the sovereignty of human colonies, to cease their aggressive expansion into humanity's borders. But now they were testing their boundaries, and humanity was about to pay the price. Kane's anger flared, a flicker of red-hot fury rising inside him. His fingers brushed over the cold, polished surface of his desk. "This isn't a breach. It's an act of war." "We're outgunned," Reed said. She didn't speak with fear, but with grim acknowledgement. The Empire had fleets capable of obliterating human defenses with overwhelming firepower. "Doesn't matter," Kane said, his voice icy with resolve. "Get me the fleet commander, and let's see if the Empire thinks it can just waltz through our territory like this. We fight, or we die trying." The fleet's response. Within moments, the orders were transmitted across the fleet. The Valiant, as the spearhead of humanity's war effort, was the first to deploy. But Kane knew it wouldn't be enough. They had to move fast, using their size and speed to their advantage before the Empire could bring its full weight to bear. "Captain, incoming missile lock!" the sensor officer shouted from across the bridge. Kane's instincts kicked in. "All ships, deploy point defense!" He grabbed the armrests of his chair as the ship lurched into a sharp, evasive maneuver. "Get me a targeting solution on that flagship now!" The Valiant was fast. No warship had ever matched its agility. It rolled through space, dodging the incoming missiles, but the Empire's firepower was relentless. The sensors showed the missiles coming in at near light speed, a perfect salvo of death that threatened to end humanity's first stand before it even began. "Firing point defense," shouted the weapons officer. A flurry of anti-missile rounds shot out from the ship's hull, punching through the void and tearing the missiles apart before they could get any closer. But that was only the first wave. A second barrage of projectiles lit up the sky, a cascade of destruction headed straight for the Valiant. "Brace for impact!" Kane yelled, his voice steel. The ship rocked violently as explosions tore into its shields, the hull creaking and groaning as the sheer force of the blasts hit. The alarms blared. "Shields at 55%! Hull integrity at 78%! The Valiant was built to take a beating, but even this was testing its limits. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but not outwilled. Kane looked to Reed, his eyes steely with determination. "We're not running. We're going to punch them right in the teeth. Prepare the main cannons. Lock onto their flagship." "Sir, we don't have time to," Reed started, but Kane's icy gaze stopped her. "We fight, or we die." The battle for survival. Target acquired, the weapons officer confirmed, and Kane's heart hammered in his chest. "Fire!" A deafening roar filled the bridge as the Valiant's massive railguns unleashed their full force. The cannon shots, each one carrying the weight of humanity's defiance, streaked through the void, slamming into the flagship's outer hull. Sparks erupted, and for a moment it seemed like they might actually have a chance. "Direct hit! Shields failing on their flagship!" the weapons officer yelled. But the Empire wasn't going to back down so easily. The flagship, the Maranthos, retaliated with its own barrage of plasma bolts. The Valiant's shields flared brightly, absorbing the fire, but the strain was evident. It wouldn't hold for long. "We're losing shields fast, Captain," Reed called out. "We need reinforcements, or we won't last the next wave." "We won't wait for reinforcements," Kane growled. "We take the fight to them. Full forward thrust. Let's breach their defenses." With a single, decisive move, the Valiant shot forward, closing the distance between it and the flagship. It was a gamble, but Kane had always believed in taking the fight directly to the enemy. "Prepare for boarding action," Kane shouted to his team. The Valiant's dropships were primed, ready to deploy troops directly onto the enemy vessel. "You heard the man," Sergeant Lin, Kane's lead assault officer, barked. "Get to your stations, now." The breach. The Valiant slammed into the side of the Maranthos with the force of a crashing comet. "Deploy now!" Kane roared as the outer hatch blasted open. He grabbed his pulse rifle and was the first to leap into the breach, followed by his squad. The chaos of war erupted around him. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning plasma and the heavy clatter of boots on steel. Humans had one advantage over the Empire: rage. And Kane had plenty of that. They stormed through the corridors of the Maranthos, cutting down Imperial soldiers with swift, decisive strikes. Every corner, every hallway was a bloody battleground. "Push forward! No prisoners!" Kane shouted, his voice a constant command that drove his troops forward. The endgame. As Kane and his team pushed deeper into the heart of the Imperial flagship, they reached the command center. The enemy was waiting for them, but they were not prepared for the storm humanity was about to unleash. "This is it," Kane said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "Time to end this." The final clash was swift and brutal. Kane fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose, his blade cutting through the air like lightning, his gunshots punctuated by screams of victory and death. When the dust settled, the Maranthos' command center lay in ruins. The Imperial commanders were dead, The ship was theirs. "Mission complete, sir." Lin's voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck the Empire where it hurt. Kane stood amidst the wreckage, the taste of victory bitter in his mouth. The war had just begun. "Phase 2, Kane said, looking out the viewport at the vast expanse of space ahead. "We end this. Now." A galaxy on fire. The Maranthos was a prize, but Kane knew that in the vastness of space, battles were won and lost in seconds. The Empire had 1,000 ways to retaliate, and the odds of them letting this minor setback slide were 0. The moment they heard about the Valiant's victory, the Empire would strike back harder. They always did. "Captain, we have incoming comms from the fleet," Reed said, her voice tight with urgency. Kane moved swiftly to her side, his gaze cutting across the data streams flashing on the screen. The comms channel was secured, encrypted, but there was no mistaking the familiar voice. "Kane," the voice came through, gravely serious. "This is Admiral Hughes. We've got a massive response coming. Imperial reinforcements are already en route. They're deploying an entire fleet to deal with you. You need to get out of there now." Kane's jaw clenched. Hughes was the head of the human fleet's defense forces, and if he was telling Kane to run, it meant the situation was about to get a lot worse. "Admiral," Kane said, his voice calm but laced with a dangerous edge. "You know, the Empire is not going to just let us slip away. We're staying and finishing what we started." A brief silence stretched before Hughes responded, his voice tight. "You're making a mistake, Kane. They're bringing everything they have. If you don't retreat, they'll wipe you out. The Valiant is the spearhead of our fleet. Losing it would mean losing humanity's best hope." "Understood, Admiral," Kane said, cutting off the transmission. "We don't retreat." He turned toward the bridge crew, his expression set in stone. "Reed, deploy all remaining assault forces. We're going to give the Empire a lesson they won't forget. Prepare for Phase 2. The crew exchanged wary glances. Kane's words weren't just a command. They were a declaration. No one would run. Not while he was in charge. Not while humanity's survival was at stake. The fight for humanity. As the Valiant sped through space toward the coordinates Kane had set, the ship's tactical display came alive with red blips. An entire Imperial armada was converging on their location. A full fleet of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and fighters. "Incoming hostile ships," the sensor officer shouted. "Massive force. We're looking at least 5 dreadnoughts, 12 heavy cruisers, and 30 fighter wings." Kane didn't flinch. The odds were astronomical, but they were humans. They fought with ferocity, resourcefulness, and a refusal to quit. "Bring the shields online," Kane barked. "Focus fire on their lead dreadnought. Target their engines. Let's slow them down." The Valiant's weapon systems hummed to life, and the ship shook as the massive railguns fired at the oncoming enemy. The first shot hit the lead dreadnought, tearing a hole in its side. But it wasn't enough to cripple the giant ship. The Empire was too powerful, too entrenched. They'd come for vengeance. "Direct hit on enemy dreadnought's engines!" Reed shouted. "They're slowing down, but they've returned fire. Shields holding at 42%. "Keep pushing," Kane shouted. "We need to buy time for the rest of our fleet to join the fight." Kane's eyes flicked to the enemy ships converging on their position. His mind was already working, planning. The Valiant might have been faster than the Empire's Titans, but it was still small compared to their vast armada. "Initiate evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "We can't let them pin us down." The ship twisted and turned, rolling and weaving through space as Imperial weapons flashed in deadly arcs. The fighters were already launching from the massive dreadnoughts, thousands of them, small, fast, and lethal. "All fighter wings deployed," Reed shouted. "We've got at least 24 hostile fighters in range. They'll be on us in seconds." Kane's lips twisted into a grim smile. Let them come. The wild dogs of war. The Valiant had a secret weapon, the Scorpions, the human fleet's most feared special forces unit. They were elite soldiers, equipped with the best tech available, trained to survive the impossible. Kane had handpicked them himself, and now he would deploy them in the heart of the battle. "Deploy the Scorpions," Kane ordered, his voice cold. "They're boarding parties. They'll get us on that enemy dreadnought and cripple it from the inside. Make sure they're ready for anything." A series of rapid beeps echoed as the Valiant's dropships roared to life, their engines spitting fire as they shot out of the hangar bays. Kane's heart raced as he watched the dropships leave. This was it. The first wave of human fury was about to be unleashed on the Empire. The fighter drones locked into the dropships, protecting them as they made their approach to the dreadnought. The Empire had underestimated humanity before, and they were about to learn how wrong they were. "Enemy fighter wings closing in!" the comms officer yelled. Kane's hands gripped the command chair as the battle unfolded in real time. He could hear the roar of the Valiant's engines as the ship lurched forward again, dodging and weaving as fighters pursued from every angle. Laser fire ripped through space, scorching the hull, but the Valiant kept moving, unstoppable. "Scorpions are on target!" the tactical officer shouted. "They've boarded the enemy dreadnought. Let's see if we can crack it open from the inside." "Good hunting," Kane muttered to himself. "Bring us down to their heart." The inner war. Inside the enemy dreadnought, the Scorpions moved with lethal precision. They were ghosts in the ship's tight corridors, silent and deadly. Their mission was simple: infiltrate, sabotage, and cripple the Imperial vessel. The Scorpions weren't just soldiers. They were human war machines, fighting with the desperation of those who had everything to lose. Sergeant Lin led the first assault team, his tactical HUD displaying real-time data as he and his squad stormed through the enemy's ship. Explosions rocked the ship's corridors as the Scorpions planted charges and tore through Imperial defenses. "Clear the bridge!" Lin shouted into his comms. "We need to disable their command center." The group breached the command deck, eliminating the remaining Imperial officers with brutal efficiency. The Scorpions planted explosives on the central consoles and control panels, sending the ship into chaos. The breaking point. Back on the Valiant, Kane knew the fight wasn't over. The enemy dreadnought was crippled, but the rest of the Empire's fleet was still a formidable threat. "The Valiant is holding, but our shields are going to fail soon," Reed warned. "If we don't get more firepower, we're going down." "Hold steady," Kane said, eyes locked on the viewport. The enemy's reinforcements were close, too close. He had one chance. "Full speed ahead. We finish this now." The Valiant rocketed toward the nearest dreadnought, its engines flaring in defiance. They were no longer just running. Now they were attacking with everything they had. Humanity would not back down. Not now, not ever. The final clash was imminent. The war had only just begun, and humanity's rage would burn brighter than any star. The storm. Within the storm. The Valiant roared through the void, its engines straining under the immense pressure as Kane locked his focus on the tactical display. He could feel the ship vibrating beneath him, every movement a reminder of the razor-thin edge they were teetering on. The Empire had thrown everything at them, and though their defenses held for now, it was clear that this was only the beginning. "Admiral Kane," Reed's voice came through, sharp and strained. "The Empire's reinforcements are pouring in. We're outnumbered 5-1, and our shields are at 30%. We need to make a choice: retreat or press the attack." Kane's eyes flickered to the holomap, showing the Imperial fleet consolidating around their position. They'd pushed the enemy back, but not far enough. The Valiant was already on the edge of its endurance. "We don't retreat," Kane growled, his voice like gravel. "We press. Prepare for Phase 3. We break them now, or die trying." His hands gripped the edge of the command chair. This was it. The galaxy would know that humanity wouldn't fall so easily. He was going to make sure the Empire would regret every moment of this war. "Reed, can you get us in range of their flagship?" Kane asked, his eyes fixed on the advancing Imperial fleet. "Yes, Captain. But it's risky. We'd be exposed to fire from all sides." Kane nodded. "Then we'll make it count." Desperate gambit. As the Valiant closed the gap to the enemy flagship, the battle around them raged in all directions. Fighter wings spiraled around them like hornets, and the sheer mass of firepower being exchanged was staggering. Every shot felt like the last. But Kane knew that if they could disable the flagship, the Empire's coordination would fall apart. "Launch the strike teams," Kane ordered. "Get them on board. I want every inch of that ship sabotaged." The dropships flew in from every angle, slamming into the enemy flagship's hangars in a vicious assault. The Scorpions were already on the ground, tearing through enemy lines like wolves. Their mission was to infiltrate, sabotage, and destroy everything that could control the ship. The dropships gave no warning before the assault teams poured out, their advanced armor flashing as they cut through enemy soldiers with brutal efficiency. The Empire's defenses were overwhelmed by the sheer force of humanity's determination. Every Scorpion was a force of nature, and the flagship, once a symbol of the Empire's might, began to buckle under the onslaught. Enemy command. A house divided. Inside the enemy flagship's command center, the senior officers watched in horror as their control systems flickered and their tactical positions became increasingly unstable. "What's happening?" one of the commanders yelled, slamming his fist against the console. "The humans!" another officer began, before being cut off by the shrill alarm klaxon. "They've breached the internal defense grid. The lower decks are being overrun." Admiral Kaller, the officer in charge of the flagship's operations, stood with his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. His posture was as rigid as the Empire's entire structure. He was unshaken, even as the reports came in about the Scorpion's rapid advancement. "Alert the reinforcements," he barked. "They must hold the ship long enough for us to regain control. And tell the fleet to prepare to fire on the Valiant. We'll turn the tables now." But Kaller's calm demeanor masked a simmering rage. He had underestimated humanity's tenacity. He'd believed they could be crushed easily, but now he knew that the humans had something far more dangerous than just weapons. They had something the Empire had long since forgotten. Rage. Human fury. Back on the Valiant, Kane's mind was racing. The flagship's internal sabotage was proceeding as planned, but the pressure was mounting. The fleet was on the brink of crushing them from all sides, and every second felt like a countdown to certain destruction. "Captain, we've got incoming fire," Reed warned, her voice laced with tension. "They're locking on with heavy artillery. We can't take much more of this." Kane's eyes narrowed. There was no more room to run. The Valiant was too far in. There was no escape, not unless they wiped out the enemy flagship's command center. "We need to hit their weapons grid," Kane said. "Full burn. Bring us into close range of their flagship's aft shields." The Valiant lurched forward, her engines firing with a deafening roar. The ship groaned under the strain as Kane gave the order to fire. "All cannons! Full power!" Kane shouted. The Valiant's weapons unleashed a barrage of firepower, a series of concentrated shots aimed directly at the flagship's weapons grid. The impact was devastating. Missiles and railgun rounds crashing into the flagship's shields, causing a cascade of explosions across its surface. Inside the flagship, explosions rocked the entire ship, The command deck was now a battleground. Sparks flew as the lights flickered, and officers scrambled to maintain control over the failing systems. Caller's jaw clenched as he stared at the tactical readouts, which were now filled with more red than he could bear to count. "We're losing control," the weapons officer gasped, looking at the flames licking up the walls of the command center. "The humans have disabled the weapon systems." "Not yet," Caller sneered, his voice laced with bitter resolve. "We still have our fleet. We'll tear them apart with sheer numbers." But even as he spoke, he realized that the tide had begun to shift. The Empire's overconfidence was cracking under the weight of humanity's fury. The flagship's guns were down, its shields flickering, and the humans. They were relentless. The last strike. With the flagship vulnerable, Kane saw his chance. The Valiant had taken a beating, but it was still moving. The rest of the fleet had closed in, but the Imperial forces were starting to break apart. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for supremacy. Humanity was showing the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. "All forward batteries, fire at will," Kane shouted. "Engage the flagship's vulnerable sections. Target their reactor." The Valiant's weapons unleashed hell. Railguns screamed through the void, missiles rocketing forward in a wave of destruction. The flagship's reactor exploded, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. Imperial ships around them began to falter, their fleets in disarray as the flagship's demise caused a ripple effect of chaos. "The flagship is down," Reed shouted, a note of disbelief in her voice. "We've done it! They're breaking!" Kane's gaze turned to the viewport, where the remains of the flagship burned in the cold emptiness of space. But he didn't relax. The war wasn't over. This was just the beginning. "Keep fighting," Kane said, his voice cold. "Humanity's rage is just getting started. Retaliation in the void." The aftermath of the Valiant's victory over the Empire's flagship was like a fever dream. Kane stood at the war room table, staring at the holographic projections that floated in front of him, still glowing with a faint pulse from the battle. His fleet had emerged victorious, barely, but the cost had been severe. Admiral Kaler's flagship was gone, but the Empire wasn't one to fall easily. Kane knew they wouldn't just retreat. They would regroup, and they would come at them harder than ever before. The Empire's pride had been wounded, and pride, as any soldier knew, was dangerous. "Admiral," Reed's voice broke through his thoughts, "we've received a transmission from the Imperial High Command." Kane raised an eyebrow, his fingers still hovering over the console. "What are they offering?" "Surrender." Reed's expression darkened. "Hardly. It's a declaration of war." Kane leaned forward, his tone steely. "They're not just going to let us get away with this. What are they saying?" Reed's hands flew across the console, and a large projected hologram of the Imperial Fleet Commander appeared. The message was cold, calculated. "You think you can defeat us? You are nothing more than a pest that has dared to strike at the heart of the Empire. But your defiance will be met with annihilation. Prepare for the full wrath of the Imperial Armada. Your destruction will be a lesson to every species in this galaxy." Kane's fists clenched. He could feel the tension in the room. His crew knew what this meant. This wasn't just a threat. This was a promise of hell. "Tell the fleet to prepare for combat. This war is far from over." The Empire's fury. The Imperial fleet wasn't just regrouping. They were reinforcing. Massive dreadnoughts and wave after wave of fighter squadrons surged from the Empire's border systems, each one bigger, more brutal, and more advanced than anything Kane had ever seen. Their retaliation would be swift and overwhelming, as was the Empire's style. The Valiant wasn't ready for this kind of all-out war. They needed more time, more firepower. Kane knew they needed to strike first, to disrupt the Empire's momentum before it was too late. "Reed," Kane said, his voice cold and commanding, "can we hit them before they've fully regrouped?" "Any weaknesses in their formation?" Reed's eyes darted to the tactical display. "There's a window. The Empire's fleet is still consolidating near the outskirts of their territory. They're overextending. We can strike their supply lines, cripple their reinforcements. But we'll need to move fast." Kane nodded. "Then we hit them where it hurts. Send the Scorpions in. Prepare for an all-out strike. We'll give them a taste of what it means to anger humanity." Darkness behind the veil. As Kane's strike force barreled through the cold void of space, Reed and her team prepared for the assault. The target was a major Imperial supply depot, a logistical hub that, if destroyed, would cripple the Empire's ability to sustain its war efforts. It was risky, it was dangerous, and it was exactly what Kane had planned. But there was something deeper at play. As the Valiant moved closer to the depot, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The signals were faint, but there was something off, something they hadn't anticipated. "Admiral," Reed's voice was tense as the incoming transmissions crackled. "We're receiving new intel. The Empire knows we're coming." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Of course they do! But how?" The question burned in his mind as they entered the asteroid field near the depot, a perfect setting for an ambush. The enemy had prepared, and they had prepared well. Suddenly, the Valiant rocked violently as massive energy blasts tore through its shields. The ship groaned, its hull shuddering under the impact. "What the hell?" Kane shouted, his voice drowned out by the warning sirens. The Valiant's hull was taking hits from all directions. The asteroid field was no longer a sanctuary. It was a prison. Ambush. "Admiral, we're surrounded," Reed shouted over the alarms. The Imperial fleet was lying in wait. "They've set up a blockade, and it's stronger than we thought. We're outnumbered again, at least 3-1. Kane clenched his jaw, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. The Empire had expected them. The trap was set, and now they had nowhere to run. "Reed, get us out of here," Kane barked. "Full burn. We need to break through their lines and hit that supply depot. We can't let them reinforce." But as the Valiant surged forward, the enemy came at them with the fury of 1,000 suns. Imperial dreadnoughts fired in synchronized volleys, each shot cutting through the dark void with terrifying precision. "This is it," Kane muttered to himself, his mind racing. "This is humanity's test." Ruthless resolve. On the command deck, Kane's crew fought desperately to keep the ship together. Reed barked orders, trying to stabilize the ship's defenses. Scorpion strike teams scrambled to launch, but with the enemy closing in, it was becoming clear they were out of options. "We need a plan B," Reed said, panic creeping into her voice. "Admiral, we can't hold them much longer. We need to get out of this asteroid field." Kane's eyes flickered over the battlefield. They were in the heart of an Empire's trap, but he refused to back down. There was no running, not anymore. "Get me a direct line to the fleet," Kane ordered. "Tell them to hold the line. We're going in." Kane gritted his teeth as he made his final decision. The Valiant would push forward, through the enemy blockade, into the jaws of the Empire's full wrath. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. And Kane's message was clear. Humanity doesn't bow. The Valiant was buckling under the pressure. Hulls that once gleamed like silver under the stars were now scorched black, bent out of shape from the relentless pounding of the Empire's weapons. The ship groaned, sending vibrations through the command deck as alarms blared like the wails of a dying animal. But Kane didn't flinch. "Full speed ahead," he ordered, gripping the armrest of his chair as the ship's engines roared back to life. "We push through their lines, or we die trying." The crew moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, executing orders with military efficiency, but even Reed's calm, analytical demeanor faltered as the Empire's attack intensified. The asteroid field, once their cover, had become their tomb. With Imperial ships closing in, there was nowhere to go but forward. "Admiral," Reed said, her voice barely audible over the storm of noise filling the bridge. "The Scorpions are launching, but they won't hold for long. We need to break through their main line and destroy the supply depot. If we don't, reinforcements will flood in." Kane's gaze hardened. He knew the stakes. If they didn't take out the depot, the Empire's forces would overwhelm them in a matter of hours, cutting off their escape and ensuring total annihilation. "We make the depot our priority," Kane growled. "We sacrifice everything to destroy it. All hands, full fire on the station. Everyone else, keep the fleet busy." The call to war. In the heart of the Valiant's docking bay, the Scorpions, a crack team of humanity's elite strike forces, prepared for their final mission. The men and women of this team had fought and bled together for years. Now, it was time for them to prove once and for all that humanity was more than just a fleeting memory in the galaxy. Sergeant Eliza Grant, leader of the Scorpions, stood at the head of her unit, adjusting the straps of her battle armor. Her face, weathered with years of combat, reflected the gravity of their mission. Her eyes scanned her team, each one of them eager to face the coming storm. "Listen up," Grant's voice rang out, slicing through the tension like a knife. "We hit them hard and fast. No time for fancy tactics. We get in, blow the depot to hell, and get out. We've been through worse than this, so don't start doubting now. Our survival depends on us doing our jobs and doing them right." Her words were met with grim nods from her team. They had all seen the Valiant take hits, felt the strain on their nerves, but this was more than a mission. This was humanity's moment to show that they would not be cowed by the might of the Empire. With a final glance, Grant turned and led her team into the airlocks, the dark reaches of space. Outside the Valiant, the battle raged. Imperial ships filled the black void, their menacing forms dotting the space between the Valiant and their target. But Kane was not about to let them dictate the terms of this fight. The Valiant surged forward, blasting through a cluster of enemy fighters. The ship rocked under enemy fire, but the shields held, barely. "Brace for impact," Kane shouted, eyes locked on the view ahead. He didn't need to give any more orders. The Valiant's crew was well trained, and in moments, the ship was diving deeper into the heart of the Empire's blockade. The Scorpions had their own mission. As Kane's fleet drew the Empire's attention, the elite unit would slip through, unnoticed, hopefully. They reached the asteroid field's edge, and Grant gave the signal. A dozen Scorpions dropped into the freezing abyss of space, each equipped with stealth suits designed to hide them from the Empire's sensors. For the next few minutes, they would be ghosts, their presence hidden from all but the sharpest of eyes. "This is it," Grant muttered, her voice tight with resolve. "Stick together, in and out, fast, no delays." The team shot through the asteroid field, their weapons primed. Ahead, the Imperial supply depot loomed, an industrial complex the size of a small moon, its exterior dotted with defensive turrets. It wasn't just a military base, it was the nerve center for the Empire's reinforcements. If they took this down, they would cripple the Empire's response for a critical period. The Scorpions neared the complex's exterior, where the sensors were weakest. They deployed grappling hooks to latch onto the station's hull, crawling through dark corridors, avoiding detection at all costs. The noise of battle outside was muffled here, just another reminder of the chaos that waited once they completed their mission. A bitter sacrifice, Inside the Imperial supply depot, the air was thick with tension. The Scorpions were halfway to their target, the central reactor. Once they planted the charges, the explosion would cause a chain reaction, taking down not just the station, but every Imperial ship in the vicinity. 2 minutes, Grant whispered into her comms. Plant the charges and get out. This is our only shot. But as the team closed in on the reactor, they encountered something unexpected. A new set of Imperial forces had arrived, highly trained, elite shock troops. Grant's heart pounded in her chest as she saw the enemy close in, their deadly energy rifles aimed straight at her team. "Hold the line!" Grant shouted, her voice cutting through the calm. A firefight erupted, the sound of energy blasts tearing through the air. The Scorpions fought with ferocity, but there were too many of them. One by one, her team members fell. Each death was met with a silent vow from Grant to finish the mission, no matter the cost. "I've got the charges!" Lieutenant Harris yelled as he slapped a detonator onto the reactor's core. "Get out now! I'll cover you!" Grant turned, her heart sinking as she saw Harris hold off the remaining Imperial soldiers. The clock was ticking. The mission had to succeed. "Harris!" Grant screamed, but the explosion drowned out her words. A burst of blinding light enveloped the station, followed by a shockwave that rattled the Valiant to its core. The shattered Empire. The reactor exploded. The Valiant shuddered under the force of the blast as a shockwave ripped through the Imperial blockade. Ships were torn apart, debris raining down like a hellish storm. The Imperial fleet was thrown into disarray, their reinforcements halted in their tracks. It was a victory, but it had come at a steep cost. "Mission complete," Grant said, her voice barely audible over the comms. She felt empty inside, the weight of the lives lost hanging heavy on her shoulders. Back on the Valiant, Kane didn't hesitate. "Push through! We have a window! Finish what we started!" The Valiant roared forward, using the chaos of the Empire's broken forces to cut a path through the blockade. The message had been sent. The Empire might have been powerful, but humanity? Humanity was not to be underestimated. As the battle continued to rage around them, Kane watched the destruction unfold. He knew they had won a major victory, but this was just the beginning. The Empire would not let this insult stand. The war was far from over. But Kane had one thing the Empire could never take from him: humanity's resolve. The remnants of the Imperial blockade were scattered like debris across the dark void of space. The Valiant's hull creaked as it sped past the wreckage of broken warships, their shattered remains floating aimlessly. It was a victory, but not without cost. "We lost 23 ships in the assault," Lieutenant Reed reported, her voice flat, mechanical. She was trying to mask the weight of the loss, but it hung thick in the air. Kane stood on the bridge, staring out the viewport at the black abyss that stretched ahead of them. The damage to the fleet had been severe, but the mission had succeeded. The Empire's reinforcements had been halted, and their most vital supply station was no more. Still, the victory tasted bitter. "It was worth it," Kane said, his voice low but resolute. "We hit them where it hurts. They'll be scrambling for months." But Reed wasn't convinced. "Or they'll send everything they have after us." Kane turned to face her, his jaw set. He didn't need to be told that. He could already hear the clatter of their war machines moving in the distance, the rumble of their massive engines revving up. "We don't have the luxury of waiting." Kane's tone hardened. "Set course for the next target. We keep them on the back foot until we can strike again." The aftermath. In the crew quarters, the Scorpions were debriefing, the weight of their losses heavier than the blood and sweat they'd left on the battlefield. Grant stood with her arms crossed, staring at the photo of her fallen comrades, Harris's face frozen in a smile that seemed to mock her now. It was a constant reminder of the price they paid for their success. "We don't get to mourn yet," Sergeant Mitchell said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Not until we're clear. Harris didn't die for us to sit around and grieve." The others nodded, though there was a palpable heaviness in the air. Even the most hardened warriors couldn't escape the sting of sacrifice. "We're far from clear," Grant replied, her gaze fixed on the ship's strategic maps projected before her. "The Empire will strike back with everything they have, and we're sitting on a powder keg. Revenge is a cold, calculated thing." Kane's next move was bold, but it wasn't just a strategic maneuver. It was a statement. He knew that the Empire would come for them, and they would come hard. He also knew that they were playing in dangerous waters, with the entire galaxy watching. His plan was to raid one of the Empire's command stations, a place so heavily guarded it would make even the most seasoned soldier hesitate. It wasn't just about sending a message anymore. It was about proving that humanity could bleed, but would never break. The station was located on the fringes of Imperial territory, a remote outpost that housed critical intelligence on the Empire's next moves. It was a symbol of Imperial power, one Kane intended to tear down. "Admiral," Reed said as she entered the command room, "we're about to enter enemy territory. This is reckless." Kane turned to her, eyes steely. "I've never been one for safe moves. We hit them hard, hit them where they're weakest, and we make sure they know it was humanity that did it." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Kane was right, of course. A decisive strike could cripple the Empire's communications, delay their reinforcements, and buy them time. But the cost could be staggering. "We'll need a diversion," Grant said, walking into the command room with her team. She was ready, dressed in full combat armor, her eyes sharp. "We hit the station, but we'll need you to keep them busy on the outside." Kane gave a sharp nod. "I'll provide the chaos. You do the rest." The bold raid. The operation was set in motion with brutal efficiency. The Valiant would make a direct assault on the command station, drawing the full attention of the Imperial fleet. Meanwhile, Grant's team would infiltrate the station and take the control room. They would sabotage everything: the intelligence systems, the communications arrays, and the security grid. Their goal was simple: cripple the Empire's ability to retaliate. "All units, prepare for launch!" Kane's voice rang out across the ship's PA system. The fleet was about to enter enemy space, and there was no turning back now. As the Valiant closed in on the Imperial station, the bridge was a hive of activity. The entire crew was at their stations, ready for the coming storm. Outside, the first enemy ships began to appear, dozens of them, closing in fast. The Empire had mobilized. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Kane barked as the first wave of fire slammed into the shields. The Valiant shook violently, but its shields held for now. Kane's gaze was locked on the station ahead. "All fighters, launch!" He pressed the intercom, sending the command down to the hangar. Dozens of sleek fighter craft erupted from the Valiant's hangars, their engines screeching as they cut through the space between them and the Imperial station. Chaos unleashed. The battle that ensued was like a symphony of violence. Imperial forces scrambled to react, sending every available ship into the fray. The Valiant surged forward, dodging blasts and retaliating with its own devastating firepower. The space around them became a maelstrom of destruction. Fighter craft exploded in clouds of fire, and massive warships clashed in a deadly dance. But the Scorpions had a mission of their own. They dropped from the Valiant, cloaked and silent, to land on the station's surface. The team moved like shadows, using their stealth suits to avoid detection as they crept toward their target: the central control room. "This is it," Grant muttered, her voice a whisper. "We're about to break their heart." But as they reached the control room, a chilling realization hit. "They knew we were coming," Mitchell said, his voice shaking. "Ambush!" Heavy blasts erupted from the walls, and the Scorpions found themselves under attack by a second, more elite group of Imperial soldiers. Troopers clad in black armor, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The Empire's new weapon. The true horror of the Empire's revenge came in the form of a new type of soldier. Enhanced, bioengineered warriors who were a terrifying fusion of man and machine. They were faster, stronger, and more resilient than anything humanity had faced before. Grant gritted her teeth as she opened fire on the nearest trooper, her shots bouncing harmlessly off their armored suits. "Fall back!" she shouted to her team. "We need to regroup." The battle raged inside the station, but the odds were rapidly tipping in favor of the Empire. Kane was fighting his own battle outside, trying to buy them the time they needed. As the Scorpions retreated, Grant's heart sank. They were outgunned, and without backup, the mission was in danger. Shattered hopes, burning resolve. The Valiant hung in the void, battered and scarred by the brutal skirmishes of the past few days. The hull creaked with every passing minute, as though the ship itself mourned the losses it had sustained in battle. Kane stood at the command table, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the smooth surface, his eyes fixed on the flickering tactical display. He wasn't one for sentiment, but it was hard to ignore the weight of what they had just faced. The bioengineered soldiers were unlike anything the crew had ever encountered. They were faster, stronger, and more relentless than any human adversary. And despite their best efforts, the mission had been a failure. The aftermath. A moment of silence. Inside the crew quarters, the silence was deafening. The usual chatter of soldiers preparing for the next battle was absent. Instead, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional clink of armor being discarded. Grant sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the same photo of Harris she had carried since the beginning of the war. Her hands were shaking, but her expression was one of grim determination. She had seen men die before, her own brothers in arms, but this felt different. This wasn't just a casualty of war. This was something more insidious. Mitchell walked over and sat down next to her, his face etched with the same quiet pain. He had been part of the assault on the command center, and the memory of the enhanced soldiers, their eyes glowing with that unnatural fury, was seared into his mind. "We underestimated them," Mitchell said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we could outsmart them, but they were already prepared for us." Grant looked up, her eyes hardening. "We can't afford to make that mistake again. The Empire isn't going to stop. We have to adapt." Mitchell nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "But how do we adapt to that? To something that's not even human?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. No one had the answer, not yet. But they all knew the truth. If they didn't find a way to counter the Empire's new weapons, they wouldn't make it through the next battle. On the bridge, Kane stared at the star chart projected before him. His mind was already working, formulating plans, adjusting tactics. But even he knew they couldn't just charge headlong into the next fight. They needed something more. "Lieutenant Reed," Kane called out, his voice steady. "I need a full report on our fleet's status. What's our combat readiness?" Reed's fingers danced over her console as she input the data, her expression focused. "The Valiant is operational, but we've lost key fighter craft and one of our stealth ships in the last engagement. The fleet is down to 70% strength, but we can still mount a counter-offensive." Kane nodded. "Good. Prepare the remaining ships for immediate deployment. We're going to hit them where it hurts most. This time, we don't just strike, we cripple them." Reed hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Sir, I've been running simulations on the bioengineered soldiers. They're an unknown factor. If we hit their supply base, they'll just send more. If we strike their research facility, they might have a way to turn the tide. Kane's eyes hardened. Then we find their research facility. The Valiant's next target was the Empire's primary bioengineering lab, a heavily fortified station on the edge of Imperial space. It was their last hope to find a weakness in the Empire's terrifying new weapon. The ship's crew had little choice but to rely on whatever intel they could gather from defectors and their own reconnaissance. As Kane and Reed discussed the next mission strategy, a new figure entered the command room. Colonel Alex Granger, the head of the Human Resistance's Intelligence Division, stood in the doorway, her uniform impeccably pressed, but her eyes weary from weeks of constant war. "Kane," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "We've uncovered something. The Empire's bioengineering division isn't just making soldiers. They're creating entire squads of these enhanced troops. And they're getting better. But they also have a weakness." Kane's eyes narrowed. "What kind of weakness?" Granger stepped forward, her face serious. "It's their neural synchronization. These soldiers are linked together in a hive-like system. If we can disrupt that connection, using an EMP burst, for example, we might be able to incapacitate them for long enough to take them out." Kane felt a surge of hope. "How do we get our hands on one of these neural disruptors?" Granger smiled faintly. "That's where the research facility comes in. We get in, find the schematics, and we might just have a shot at turning the tide in our favor." As the Valiant neared the bioengineering station, the crew prepared for what would likely be their most dangerous mission yet. The enhanced soldiers were a formidable enemy, but with the right tools, they might just have a chance. "Everyone listen up," Kane's voice rang out over the ship's PA system. "We're about to take the fight directly to the heart of the Empire's bioengineering program. This is a one-way trip, so we need everyone sharp. No mistakes." Grant, Mitchell, and the rest of the Scorpions were briefed on the mission parameters. This would be a covert operation, with a small infiltration team striking deep into the facility to extract the necessary intelligence. The rest of the crew would provide backup and ensure that the Empire didn't have the opportunity to retaliate. "This is it," Grant muttered as she checked her gear. "No turning back." Mitchell grinned, a flash of determination in his eyes. "Wouldn't be a real war if there wasn't a little danger, right?" The stealth team dropped into the heart of the facility, landing silently on the metallic surface. The air was cold, the sound of their boots the only noise that echoed in the dead silence. The facility was a maze of reinforced hallways, guarded by both human soldiers and the bioengineered monsters that Kane and his team had come to fear. "Stay close," Grant ordered, her voice low and steady. "We get in, get the data, and get out. No heroics." They moved with precision, their stealth suits blending into the shadows. Every step was calculated, every move made with the purpose of avoiding detection. The Empire's defenses were formidable, but the Scorpions were experts at moving through enemy territory unnoticed. But as they reached the heart of the facility, something went wrong. A distant hum vibrated through the walls, and the lights flickered ominously. "Get ready," Grant whispered, her pulse quickening. "We're not alone." Before they could react, the enhanced soldiers appeared. But they weren't the same as the ones they had faced before. These were faster, more aggressive. The link between them was unmistakable. Each soldier's eyes glowed with an eerie light, and they moved as one, like a single, unstoppable force. "They're coming!" Mitchell shouted, already bringing his weapon to bear. The battle erupted in a frenzy of gunfire and explosions. The Valiant drifted silently through the dark expanse of space, its lights dimmed to avoid detection. The comms were quiet, save for the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the bridge. Kane stood near the command table, his face a mask of determination. But the weight of the mission bore down on him. They were on the cusp of something monumental. This next strike could cripple the Empire's bioengineering operations. But Kane knew that the cost would be steep. With every step deeper into Imperial space, the odds stacked higher against them. The strategy. Time is running out. Status report. Kane's voice was calm but sharp, his tone betraying the urgency of the situation. Reed, the operations officer, tapped away at her console, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. She looked up with a stern expression. "Sir, the facility is on high alert. We detected heavy traffic in and out of the research station. They're preparing for something, probably a counterattack. The bioengineered soldiers are being deployed across the sector." Kane clenched his jaw, the sense of time slipping through his fingers like sand. He knew they couldn't wait any longer. If they didn't act now, they would lose their chance. "Prepare the team. We're going in. We'll hit them fast, and we'll hit them hard." The infiltration. Silent thunder. The crew was preparing for the most dangerous operation yet. Kane's Special Forces unit, the Scorpions, was to spearhead the assault. This time, however, the mission was different. They weren't just attacking a base. They were aiming to take down the core of the Empire's bioengineering program. This was the heart of the Empire's new weapon. If they could destroy this, they would cripple the Empire's entire military advantage. Grant ran her hand over her combat gear, checking the pulse rifle attached to her side, making sure everything was in order. She wasn't afraid. Fear had no place on the battlefield, but there was a quiet anxiety gnawing at her. They'd been fighting non-stop for weeks, and each victory came at a cost. Mitchell walked over, his helmet tucked under his arm. His face, though covered in the grime of constant combat, still held the confidence of a soldier who had faced death and won. "We can't let these bastards get the better of us," Mitchell muttered, tightening his gloves. "We've taken out their fleets, crippled their commanders. Now we finish this." Grant looked at him, her lips pulling into a faint, grim smile. "It's not about revenge anymore, Mitchell. It's about survival." The strike. Silent storm. The Scorpions dropped silently onto the surface of the Empire's bioengineering station, the wind of the atmosphere whipping across their faces. The station was a sprawling complex, built into the surface of an asteroid. Tall spires of metal and glass reached upward, reflecting the pale light of distant stars. It was an imposing structure, a stark reminder of the Empire's cold, unyielding nature. Kane gave the signal, and the team moved as one. They were experts, trained for this kind of operation. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. They entered the facility through an air vent, bypassing the main entrance to avoid detection. The air inside was sterile, almost clinical, the faint smell of chemicals hanging in the air. "Stay sharp," Kane murmured. "This place is a nest of vipers." The unseen threat. As the team advanced through the sterile corridors, their footfalls muffled by the sound-dampening boots they wore, the sense of foreboding grew. The walls were lined with holographic displays, showing various human genomes, test subjects, and bioengineered soldier schematics. This was no ordinary research station. It was a factory, one designed for creating soldiers, monsters, and machines that obeyed only the will of the Empire. "On your six, Grant," Kane said softly, his eyes scanning the hallway ahead. "Watch for cameras." Grant's response was a tight nod. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the shadow of something large moved on the other side of the door. She could hear the steady hum of machinery, but there was something else. Something unsettling. in the stillness. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and the Scorpions found themselves face to face with the Empire's latest monstrosities, bioengineered soldiers. Their bodies were massive, their muscles rippling under their black armor. Their eyes were cold, voids of inhumanity, their neural synchronization making them a singular, terrifying unit. The soldiers moved in unison, their weapons raised and aimed. The air crackled with tension. Without a word, the battle began. Grant's rifle blazed, rounds tearing through the air as she unleashed a torrent of fire into the approaching soldiers. The bioengineered monstrosities absorbed the hits with unnerving precision, their bodies built to withstand the very weapons meant to destroy them. "Take them down! Now!" Kane barked as he hurled a grenade into the fray. The explosion rocked the corridor, sending a shockwave through the facility. But the soldiers didn't falter. They pressed forward. Mitchell dove behind cover, his pulse rifle roaring as he aimed for weak points in the soldiers' armor. "These bastards are relentless!" he shouted, dodging a spray of fire that shattered the metal wall beside him. Kane fired off a shot, his hand steady as the recoil of his weapon hit him. "We're not losing this one! Push forward!" The Scorpions pressed on, each moment more brutal than the last. The bioengineered soldiers were an unstoppable force, but the Scorpions weren't amateurs. They fought with precision, every move calculated, but it was clear that they were outgunned. Desperate measures. The last stand. With every floor they ascended, the resistance against the Scorpions grew fiercer. The bioengineered soldiers were relentless. They seemed to be everywhere. And just when the team thought they had reached the core of the facility, an unthinkable revelation hit them like a freight train. "We're too late," Grant gasped as she scanned the data on her terminal. They've already initiated the next phase of their project. These soldiers, they're just the beginning. They're creating a new, more dangerous breed of weapon. Kane cursed under his breath. "We can't let them deploy this. We've got to stop it." In a final desperate push, Kane activated the self-destruct sequence on the station. "Get to the extraction point, now!" he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Scorpions retreated, fighting their way back to the extraction point as the entire station began to rumble and shake. Explosions rocked the walls, the screams of soldiers and the mechanical whir of the facility's last, dying breaths filling the air. Escape. The cost of war. As the Scorpions made their way back to the landing bay, the ground trembled beneath them. The self-destruct countdown was in its final moments. Kane and the team fought through swarms of bioengineered soldiers, the sound of gunfire and explosions ringing in their ears. "We're almost there," Mitchell shouted, pushing forward, sweat and blood mixing on his face. The exit was in sight. Grant turned to look back, her eyes scanning the horizon one last time. "The Empire's never going to stop coming," she muttered. "But we just hit them harder than they thought possible." Kane didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said everything. This war wasn't over. But they had sent a message. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and that would be their undoing. The Scorpions had barely touched down on their extraction ship when the station's self-destruct sequence obliterated the heart of the Empire's bioengineering program. The explosion could be seen for light years, a flash that would be remembered across the galaxy as a symbol of humanity's defiance. But for Kane and his team, the victory felt hollow. The Valiant was in orbit, its hull scarred from the last engagement. The crew had already started their recovery procedures, and the silence in the ship's holds echoed the weight of the battle they had just fought. Aftermath, ghosts of the past. Kane walked the halls of the Valiant alone. His boots made soft, purposeful thuds as he passed crew members hard at work. He could see the exhaustion in their eyes, Each person had given everything, and yet the battle was far from over. He passed by the medbay, glancing inside. Reed and Mitchell were there, both battered but alive. Reed's arm was in a sling, and Mitchell's face was a mess of cuts and bruises. But they'd survived. That was the best they could hope for. "Commander." Kane turned as he heard the soft voice of Grant. She stepped forward, her armor still bearing the marks of battle, but her eyes held a fire. "You look like you've seen better days," Kane said with a wry grin. Grant didn't return the smile. "I'm not sure we can win this war, Kane. Not like this. The Empire has too much firepower." "I know," Kane replied, his voice quieter. "But we've got something they don't. Our will to fight." Grant nodded slowly. "We have to strike them at their heart. If we don't, if we let them rebuild, they'll just keep coming." Regrouping. The rebuild. As the Valiant drifted toward their next location, the crew was already planning the next phase. It wasn't enough to cripple the Empire's bioengineering program. Kane knew that the Empire would adapt. They always did. And the next fight would be bigger, bloodier. Back on the bridge, Kane stood over the tactical holomap, eyes narrowing as he considered their options. His mind raced. Their next move had to be calculated. Every decision was critical. If they underestimated the Empire, they would pay for it in ways they couldn't imagine. "We can't hit them head on," Kane said to his senior officers. "We need to find the source, the mastermind behind their military operation. We'll cut off the head of the snake." Reed adjusted her glasses, scanning the data. "I'm tracking a high-level Imperial fleet. Communications suggest they're moving to a new base of operations on the fringes of the sector. If we hit them now, we could cripple their command infrastructure." Kane turned his gaze toward her. "But we need more than just the fleet, Reed. We need intel, something that will lead us to their leader, the person pulling the strings behind this chaos. The intel, a dangerous game." The Valiant entered the dark expanse of the frontier, its sensors on high alert. The mission had changed. This wasn't just another raid. It was a hunt. "I've got something," Reed said, her voice suddenly tight. "I've found the name of an Imperial officer, Admiral Celis. He's been coordinating a significant portion of the Empire's bioweapon development. It looks like he's been in contact with high-ranking officials." "Where do we find him?" Kane asked, stepping closer to the console. Reed zoomed in on the map. "A private station near the Arak Nebula. It's off the grid, highly secured. But if we infiltrate it and capture him alive, we'll get the answers we need." Kane didn't hesitate. "Prepare the team. We're going in." The hunt. A deadly mission. The Scorpions suited up for their next mission, high-risk infiltration of an Imperial fortress. No more raids. This was a precise strike. Their objective was clear: capture Admiral Celis and dismantle the Empire's operations from the inside. The journey through the Arak Nebula was treacherous, its dense clouds of gas and dust concealing the enemy's movements. Kane's mind raced as he thought of the potential dangers. Nebulas could easily swallow ships, and an enemy fleet could be lying in wait. But there was no turning back now. Mitchell stepped up, his voice serious. "If we're going to pull this off, we need to be ghosts. No mistakes, no hesitation." Kane nodded. "We've all been through hell and back. We'll get this done." Infiltration. The Fortress of Shadows. The station loomed in the distance, a blackened fortress hidden within the nebula's swirling gases. The Valiant dropped out of hyperspace, cloaked in darkness, as the ship blended with the starless void. The Scorpions were already on the ground, silently deploying in a series of black dropships. The air was thick with tension as they descended toward the station's surface. The Empire's fortress was a marvel of defensive engineering. Tall, fortified walls, automated turrets, and hidden sensor arrays designed to repel any threat. But the Scorpions were no ordinary threat. Grant led the charge as the team infiltrated the station, their movements synchronized, almost silent. Their goal was the highest level of the facility, the command center, where Admiral Celis was rumored to be located. The Betrayal, a trap in the shadows. Just as Kane and his team approached the command center, Reed's voice came over the comm. "Something's wrong, Kane. I'm getting readings. Lots of them. Imperial reinforcements are incoming. We've been compromised." Kane cursed under his breath. They had walked right into a trap. "We'll fight our way out," Kane barked. "Stick to the plan. We're not leaving without Celis." The battle. Survival in the Inferno. The air turned to fire as blaster bolts ripped through the hallways, and the Scorpions found themselves in a brutal firefight with the Imperial Guards. Bioengineered soldiers, identical to those they had fought earlier, stormed the station's halls, their weapons cutting through the darkness. Kane gritted his teeth as he returned fire. "Hold the line!" The team fought with everything they had, every movement a desperate attempt to survive. But it was clear, they were outnumbered. And then, through the chaos, the worst possible thing happened. The sound of reinforced blast doors sealed shut, trapping the Scorpions inside the command center. "Damn it!" Kane growled. "Reed, get us out of here!" The blaring alarms echoed in the tight corridors of the Imperial command station, a shrieking warning to all that the intruders had breached the inner sanctum. The Scorpions were pinned down, surrounded by the Empire's elite bioengineered soldiers. Their situation was grim. Reinforcements were on the way, and the trap had been sprung. Kane stood at the heart of the chaos, the weight of command bearing down on him. His pulse hammered in his ears as he shouted into the comms. "Reed, status on the extraction. We're locked down. The whole station is on lockdown." Reed's voice crackled through the static. "The blast doors are sealed, and the external airlocks are compromised. We're not getting out the easy way." Grant leaned against the wall, reloading her weapon with mechanical precision. Her face was grim, but her eyes burned with determination. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to overrun us. We fight our way out. We take Celis, and we get the hell off this rock." "Agreed," Kane replied, scanning the command center. He knew their options were limited, but there was no other choice. "Move fast. Get Celis. We hold the line as long as we can. We're not dying here." The heart of the beast. The command center was a sleek, industrial nightmare, a maze of gleaming consoles, flickering hollow screens, and cold metal walls. This was where the Empire's strategic plans were made, and it would be the last place the Scorpions would give up without a fight. Celis was here, somewhere. Kane could feel the presence of the man they had come to capture. The key to understanding the Empire's next move, and possibly its downfall, was just behind a steel door. But they had to reach him first. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. A squad of bioengineered soldiers appeared in the hallway, their enhanced reflexes and strength giving them a terrifying advantage. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were genetic nightmares, bred for one purpose: to kill. Grant raised her rifle, her finger trembling on the trigger. "Ready?" Kane nodded. "On my mark. Take them out fast." The firefight. Blood in the halls. "Go!" Kane yelled, and the hallway erupted in a blur of motion. The Scorpions opened fire as the biosoldiers stormed toward them. The sound of blaster fire echoed like thunder, reverberating off the walls. Each shot was deadly. Each miss a slip closer to certain death. Kane dove behind a console, pulling his own blaster and unloading a series of shots into the advancing enemy. One of the soldiers dropped, its enhanced body crumpling like a ragdoll under the barrage. But there were more. Much more. "Behind us!" Reed screamed over the comms as another squad of soldiers appeared at the rear. The Scorpions were surrounded. "We're running out of time," Mitchell shouted, his voice raw with adrenaline. "Get Celis, now!" Kane's mind raced as he scanned the room for an escape route. He wasn't about to let his team die in this hellhole. "We go for Celis," Kane growled, rising from his position. "Take them down, now!" Kane and his team pushed forward, cutting their way through the enemy lines, firing with lethal precision. But it was clear that the station's walls were closing in on them. The soldiers were relentless, and every second they fought was another second of precious life ticking away. Finally, they reached the door they had been searching for, the command room where Celis was hiding. Grant kicked down the door, and inside, they found the Imperial Admiral sitting at a massive holotable, calmly observing the chaos unfolding around him. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Well, well," Celis said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I had a feeling you would come for me. You're more persistent than I thought." "You're coming with us, Celis," Kane said, his gun trained on the Admiral. "We're not leaving without you." Celis smiled, the kind of smile a man wore when he knew his fate had already been sealed. "You think you've won, Commander? You think capturing me will stop the Empire?" "We'll see," Kane replied. "You're coming with us, alive. That's an order. An Empire's last play." Just as Kane stepped forward to take Celis into custody, the room went dark. The power failed. Holoscreens blinked out of existence, and the command center was plunged into darkness. Kane cursed. "Reed, what's going on?" "I don't know," Reed replied, panic creeping into her voice. "Something's wrong. The entire station's gone dark. We can't get comms." In the dark, a voice boomed through the silence, an amplified, mocking voice. "You fools," Celis sneered. "You think the Empire would leave such an important asset unprotected?" Suddenly, the walls around them shook, and the station's internal security systems came online. Armed turrets emerged from hidden compartments in the walls, and the Scorpions found themselves under heavy fire from all sides. "Get to cover," Kane shouted as blaster bolts tore through the darkness. The Scorpions dove for shelter, but the turrets were relentless. They'd been betrayed by the very system they had hoped to exploit. The counterattack. Fight or die. "Reed, patch us through to the Valiant. Now," Kane ordered, his voice urgent. He knew that without support, they wouldn't make it out alive. But there was no reply. The station was completely cut off from the outside world. "Damn it!" Kane growled. "We're on our own!" Mitchell, bloodied but unbowed, popped up from behind cover and fired a series of shots at the nearest turret. The rounds struck the metal plating, but it was clear that the turrets were built to withstand anything short of a direct hit. "We need to disable the security systems," Grant said, peeking around the corner. "If we don't, we're dead." Kane nodded. "Reed, find the control room. We'll cover you." Reed gave a brief nod and sprinted toward the control room's door. The Scorpions are trapped in an escalating nightmare as they fight their way through a heavily fortified Imperial station. Betrayed by the Empire's security systems and surrounded by deadly bioengineered soldiers, the team must find a way to disable the defenses, capture Admiral Celis, and survive long enough for an extraction. As the tension escalates and every second feels like a lifetime, the Scorpions face their most dangerous challenge yet, fighting against an enemy that knows no mercy. The room vibrated with the hum of energy weapons as Kane and the Scorpions dove from cover to cover. The Imperial station's interior was a labyrinth of metal, flashing warning lights, and the thunderous growl of automatic weapon systems. Their initial plan to capture Admiral Celis had gone horribly awry, and now the only goal was to escape alive. Kane's comm unit crackled with a harsh burst of static. "Kane, you have to listen. We can't hold them off much longer. The whole station is going into lockdown. Reed's voice was sharp, panicked. "Damn it! Reed, where's Silas?" Kane snapped back, barely able to hear her over the roar of gunfire. "Silas! He's gone, Kane. The bastard's escape pod was already prepped. He's getting away!" The blood drained from Kane's face. He turned to face the team, eyes burning with fury. "Number, not like this. We're not leaving without him." Without warning, the blaring sound of an incoming shuttle overhead sent the Scorpions diving for cover once again. It wasn't just a shuttle, it was the escape craft Celis had prepared, and it was coming straight for them. "Damn it! The doors are sealed!" Mitchell gritted her teeth, firing on the bioengineered soldiers who poured into the command room. "We can't let him go." "We don't have a choice," Kane shouted back. "We fight or die here. Reed, do you have access to the hangar?" "I'm in." Reed's voice was calm despite the chaos. "But I'll need a minute." "You have 5 seconds," Kane snapped, calculating their slim chances of survival. "Make it count." The battle inside the command center escalated. Kane watched as one of his squad members, a young, green soldier, was struck by a burst of fire from one of the bio-soldiers. The soldier's body crumpled to the ground with a sickening thud, his rifle sliding across the polished floor. Kane's heart clenched, but there was no time to mourn. His team pushed forward, firing relentlessly as they advanced toward the hangar. The space was vast, filled with heavy transport ships and sleek fighter craft that were now their only hope for escape. But Celis's escape pod had already launched. A sudden burst of light from across the hangar drew Kane's attention. A single, sleek, black shuttle hovered above, its engines thrumming with the power of the Empire's latest tech. "Scorpions now!" Kane yelled. They sprinted across the hangar bay, blasters raised as they came upon a group of Imperial guards standing between them and the shuttle. A bloody firefight broke out, the sound of blaster fire echoing off the walls. Grant and Mitchell provided cover fire while Kane charged forward, vaulting over a crate to land behind the shuttle. The escape pod's exhaust trail was still visible in the distance, but they were too far away to intercept it now. Their only chance was to take out Silas's shuttle before it could leave the station. "I'm almost there." Reed's voice crackled again over the comm. "I've got the console." Kane saw the Imperial shuttle's engines ignite, its massive thrusters pushing it towards the spaceport's exit. It was too fast, too powerful. And Silas was about to get away. "Not today," Kane muttered to himself. With a ferocity born of desperation, Kane charged forward, leaping into a fighter cockpit just as the shuttle began to lift off. His hands moved on autopilot as he strapped himself in, engaging the fighter's weapon systems. The alarms screamed as the fighter's engines roared to life. "Reed!" Kane barked. "Seal the doors now!" "I'm on it!" Reed's voice came back, filled with urgency. A few seconds passed, and then the doors to the hangar sealed with a hiss of air. Kane's fighter shot out of the bay, tailing the shuttle as it rocketed through the station's final defenses. The battle had shifted into the vacuum of space, with the station's laser turrets firing sporadically at the retreating shuttle. But it was clear. The Scorpions would have to do this on their own. His fighter locked onto the shuttle's aft engines, its sleek design built for escape rather than combat. With a steady hand, Kane fired a pulse of energy that sent the shuttle's engines flaring in a burst of unstable plasma. "No!" Kane growled, his heart in his throat as the shuttle's pilot began to fight for control, maneuvering in desperate spirals. He was close, too close. Celis was going to die today, whether he liked it or not. The shuttle shuddered under Kane's relentless attack, the Imperial craft groaning as its systems began to fail. The escape pod was gone, but the shuttle could still be stopped. As Kane closed in on the damaged ship, his targeting system locked onto the engine core. His fighter's cannons fired in rapid succession. cutting through the Imperial shuttle's armor like paper. Kane's face was hard with determination, but he wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for every Scorpion who had died here today. The shuttle's rear exploded in a massive burst of light. The shockwave sent Kane's fighter spinning, his controls slipping from his grasp as he fought to regain control. "Kane!" Reed's voice came through his comm. "Get back to the station now!" The Imperial shuttle was in pieces, and the rest of the Empire's forces would be coming to mop up the survivors. Kane's team was still in the hangar, fighting for their lives. Through the chaos, Kane saw his squad's fighters darting into formation as they made their escape. The escape Kane barely managed to steer his crippled fighter back to the Scorpion hangar, landing with a crash that rattled every bone in his body. But they had done it. Admiral Celis was dead, the Empire's plans crippled by the Scorpion's audacity. The remaining members of the Scorpions gathered around their wrecked shuttle, panting, bloodied, but victorious. Kane surveyed the damage. Half his team was dead, including their newest recruit. But they had accomplished what few thought possible. They had struck at the heart of the Empire and survived. "You did good, Kane," Grant said, her voice steady despite the trauma of battle. "We're going to be okay." Kane looked up at the stars in the distance, his expression unreadable. "Not yet. Not until the Empire falls. But we've won the first battle." The Scorpions were still alive, and they were just getting started. The war had only just begun. But the Scorpions had proven something undeniable, that the Empire was not invincible. And in a galaxy where humanity had often been overlooked, dismissed, or crushed underfoot, it was clear now, more than ever, the humans were not to be underestimated. And one thing was for certain: the Scorpions were ready to wage war on a scale the Empire had never imagined. The dust has settled, but the war is far from over. Humanity has struck a blow to the Empire, but the fight continues. Now it's your turn to shape the future. If you enjoyed the battle, don't forget to like this video. Every click is a reminder that the human spirit is unstoppable. Drop a comment to share your thoughts, your favorite moments, or predictions for what's next in this galaxy-spanning saga. And make sure to subscribe to keep following the Scorpions on their journey. The next chapter is just around the corner. Don't miss it. Humanity endures because of you.